Aquaman, swift and powerful monarch of the oceans, with ability to summon and command all creatures of the deep. Aquaman, king of the seven seas.
Aquaman represented arguably the most mythological archetype of a sort of Joseph Campbell hero.
This is King Arthur underwater. This is the outcast who finds a destiny of being a hero.
It's epic storytelling.
He's the king of Atlantis.
I mean, he had a ball of water that would smash the hell out of you, and he would have all those animals at a moment's notice.
As a child, what appealed to me about Aquaman was just the simplicity of the concept. It's a guy who lives underwater and talks to fish. And every kid in the world knows that that's a really neat thing, to be able to just go underwater and have that underwater life and commune with the sea creatures.
I just really liked that there was a whole world underwater that he operated in.
Aquaman took me into a place I could not go by myself and opened up the undersea kingdom to me and that whole world.
For a kid, that's amazing, because that means that you can explore the bottom of the swimming pool or the bottom of the lake.
For me, the most compelling aspect of Aquaman is the ability to live underwater, swim really fast underwater, and talk to dolphins with his mind.
He's tremendously strong, which is something people don't really think about. This is a guy who walks around casually at the bottom of the ocean floor at pressures that would crush you or me. Aquaman's weakness was he could only remain out of the water for an hour, at which point he would, I guess, instantly drop dead. We never actually got to see it happen.
In some ways, he fits the standard superhero role. He's got the bright, colorful costume, he's got the incredible powers, he has a sidekick in Aqualad. So in those ways, he's very much a superhero, but he doesn't have a secret identity. He doesn't fight crime exactly. He doesn't go on missions. He basically polices the undersea realm, and he deals with a lot more fantasy elements. Whenever he's on an adventure with the Justice League, or whenever he's out here doing stuff on land, he's literally a fish out of water.
Most superheroes are outsiders. There is that sense that he is a guardian out there for the earth, and that he is separate from us, and yet he is our helper. And that's strong, powerful superhero mythology.
It's pure mythology. It is Neptune, it is Poseidon. It's classical god-hero mythology, modernized. Aquaman was created by writer Mort Weisinger and artist Paul Norris.
When Aquaman was created, it was more of a science fiction type of a character. His father was a scientist who experimented on his son and gave his son powers so he could breathe underwater and swim fast and give him strength.
He was able to use those magics of Atlantean science lost to mankind to enable his son to breathe underwater, to learn how to take oxygen from the water, and enabled Aquaman to become very fast and very strong underwater.
In the 1940s, didn't so much telepathically communicate with fish, he just talked with them. Kind of like Tarzan talked to the animals. And he wasn't king of the underwater ocean, he was just a guy in an orange shirt running around making undersea safe.
For his first 2 decades, Aquaman had some of the lamest villains in history. Smugglers, modern-day pirates, people pretending to be old pirates.
He basically spent a lot of time in the golden age of comics fighting big undersea monsters and didn't have a whole big rogues gallery. The stories were very simple, but again, full of adventure. Aquaman was not an American per se, he was basically an Atlantean. And yet, he still reflected the very patriotic American values of the day, like all good DC heroes did, and basically fought for truth, justice, in the American way.
Whether a character was from Atlantis or from another planet, it was clear that the Nazis were the enemy.
He was fighting Nazis a month before Pearl Harbor.
His world was our world. He was dealing with Nazis. He was dealing with the war effort. He was dealing with things that related to people on a day-to-day basis. As the comics slid into the 1950s and superheroes slid into the 1950s, there was more of a sense of, we're competing with TV, we're competing with movies, we're a kids' medium, we should sort of play up the simplicity of the characters to some degree, which actually, in the case of a guy like Aquaman, works to his advantage because he's not a terribly complex concept.
He was a sunny guy who fought crime and evil fishermen, and he just went around in this suit, hanging out with an octopus named Topo who could do archery and play the banjo for whatever reason. And that was really it. And it wasn't until the Silver Age version came that he actually started getting some meat to his character.
About 1959 or so, there was this huge internal shift in the strip. Within a very short period of time, a writer named Robert Bernstein, who was also a Hollywood writer at the time, came along and introduced a bunch of new elements. One of them was the notion that suddenly there was a weakness for Aquaman. He could only exist out of water for 1 hour at a time or else he would die. The notion that he would not just talk to fish, but actually telepathically communicate with them and be able to sort of read their rudimentary thoughts and be able to give them orders and commands and encourage them to do great feats for him.
And you can almost draw a line through it at Adventure Comics number 260, if my memory serves me correctly, which was a brand new origin of Aquaman. It changed the original story.
Everyone was re-examining heroes and trying to bring them more into a scientific, more of a sci-fi background. And so Aquaman really stands out because instead of making it more sci-fi, they go completely the opposite and make it more mythic.
You've got this lighthouse keeper named Tom Curry, a tragic man who lived this isolated existence on an island somewhere. And one day, this beautiful blonde-haired woman washes up on the shore, a little bit of amnesia, not sure where she comes from, but they fall in love, and they get married, and they have a child, a little boy named Arthur. And then one day the woman dies, and Tom is left to bring up the child himself. And he's not paying attention one day, the child walks under the water, and oh my God, the child's gonna drown. No, he finds the kid just playing among the fish, just breathing as naturally as can be. His powers had kicked in. And that's when Tom Curry found out the truth about his son and about his own wife, was that she was actually a survivor of the lost civilization of Atlantis. And so Arthur Curry, son of man and mermaid, essentially.
It's this strange mythic quality that was not really present in any other hero.
He began to change, he began to develop his own mythology, his own family, and with that came the dawning of some supervillains, finally.
Ocean Master was his most famous one because he'd fought Ocean Master a few times, only to find out that he was actually his own half-brother.
Once again, let's go back to classic mythology and classic folklore, and you've got the Cain and Abel story. You've got the struggle of two half-brothers here. It is so classic, it goes back to the Bible and before.
Black Manta is just a dynamic-looking character with a great sensibility.
Black Manta's sole distinguishing characteristic from the first 10 years or so of his existence was the big helmet on his head.
He's always been, in everybody's mind, the primary foil of Aquaman.
When he takes off the helmet for the first time, however, we realize he's black. And suddenly, Black Manta is not really fighting Aquaman per se. What he's trying to do is establish an underwater community whereby the black man can come and live out here in peace without racial strife.
Even when we work in comics these days, if anybody steps onto Aquaman, the first thing they want to do is tell a Black Manta story, because that's the character everybody knows and loves.
In 1960, DC Comics decided to pull its great characters together and put them into something called the Justice League of America, a big team that represented all of DC's major heroes.
And all of a sudden, by virtue of him being on the same team as Superman and Batman and Wonder Woman and Flash and Green Lantern, he was an A-lister.
He had never been on a comic book cover before. He really had never been in anything more than a 6 or 8 page story. He had never really met any of the other superheroes.
The beauty of a team book where everyone has their own individual title is you can expose the reader to characters they don't normally check out.
I think at that point, DC looked at the character and thought, well, the character's actually gaining popularity because the Justice League was a gigantic hit for DC. They went back and looked at the strip and looked at some of the more outdated elements like the original origin, like the sort of limitation of powers, and really cranked him up so that suddenly there's more of a mythology to him. Now he is the heir to the throne of Atlantis, and there is a whole Atlantean undersea civilization.
It further separated him out from being the underwater Superman. This was a character who I really believe was never defined until the writers really began to explore the other aspect of Aquaman, not the superhero to the surface world, the other side of him.
Aquaman did pretty well for himself because he went from sort of a third-string hero to a guy who set a bunch of firsts in the Silver Age of comics. He was the very first superhero to have a wedding, and all the other superheroes came out to Atlantis to be part of the ceremony. That was a big deal.
Aquaman number 18. Not a dream, not a hoax, not an imaginary story. Aquaman got married. Superheroes didn't get married.
Batman, Superman weren't getting married. Nobody else did. I think Flash got married years later. But yeah, Aquaman was one of the first ones to have a complete family.
He was the first superhero in comics that we saw actually have a child, which came about a year later, and he had this little boy named Arthur Jr.
Big part of being a king is birthing the prince who's going to be the next king.
Aquaman really was a family. It's a real wife and an actual child, and he was a father, which nobody else at DC Comics was at that time. That was a big deal for superheroes. In 1966, looking for another DC property that could complement the Superman adventures on TV, they came across Aquaman.
Superman came on first as an animated series, which was a big hit, had great ratings, and of course Filmation wanted to go into a larger series.
It was the perfect combination because it was all the things that Superman wasn't. It gave you a whole new arena to play with, it gave you whole new adventures, it gave you a different supporting cast, but most importantly, it was a completely different look than the Superman stuff.
The show's on the air, the show is a blast. I mean, we did a good job on the animation. We created a way of being able to do stuff in this country by doing stock animation, by taking scenes that we used over and over and over in different situations and in different action. You saw our ability to reuse material and make it look like there's a lot more action going on, because he was always zooming toward the camera, zooming away from the camera. Even better than Superman doing whirling stuff. On a screen, you got to have him punch through the screen. Try that in a comic book.
There was something really a lot of fun about it, and they captured some of the dynamic aspects of what was on the comic page and really brought it to the cartoon in an interesting way.
It was the best looking show on Saturday morning.
The Filmation series was an attempt to reach kids in the backdrop of the Batman television series' success in live action.
It felt like it was directly geared to someone my age. It felt it was geared to kids, and it was geared to the stuff that you kind of fantasized about as a kid, with the ability to communicate with whales and dolphins, to take out your enemies. I mean, those are really cool images.